welcome to another episode of the One Tree Hill Rewatch here on the Filmaholic channel. I'm Matthew, and today we're going to be discussing a few episodes in Season 4. We are all moved on to Season 4 now, the last season of the high school years of One Tree Hill. So today we're going to be discussing to start things off, we're going to be discussing episode 405, which is called I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness. It originally aired October 25th, 2006, so it was essentially the Halloween episode this year. It's not Halloween themed, obviously, and it shouldn't be based at Halloween. This episode would actually be based in March. But, yeah, it aired the closest to Halloween this season, which makes sense. It's very creepy, but not in the Halloween sense. It was directed by Stuart Gillard. This is his second episode, and it was written by Mark Schwann, obviously the creator of the show. So the big thing about this episode and what they've been setting up to this moment in the season, you could say they've been setting it up since the finale of season 2, when we originally saw the Watch Me Watch You on Peyton's webcam. But that's Psycho Derek, who Peyton believes is her brother at this point, and she has kind of ignored Lucas's warnings, like Lucas knows something's up, but she doesn't want to believe that, and she wants to trust Derek. This is someone who has came back into her life. She doesn't really want to make the same mistake she made with Ellie, with not letting her guard down, and she could have spent more time with Ellie if she had let her in sooner, maybe got to know her sooner, but she didn't, and that was understandable why she did that, but she's trying to not make those same mistakes again with Derek. So Lucas, though, he's not trusting this guy. He knows something's up. The guy lied about Lucas himself at Trick. So Lucas is doing some research, and he takes the number that Ellie left for Peyton, and he ends up taking it to the police. And he's, like, can you guys bring him in? Can you guys look into this guy for me and, like, figure out what's up with this dude? Why is he so weird? Like, is there anything off? Is it just in my head? Is it crazy? And the cop, which is weird because most of the cops in Tree Hill suck, as we can see moving forward, especially in the later seasons. But this cop, trusts Lucas, and he knows that Lucas is the one that saved Peyton in the school shooting, and he knows that what kind of person, I guess, Lucas is. So he's going to bring the guy in and question him. So we got that going on in the episode, and we've also got, the whole pregnancy thing that we've been teased with since the finale of season 3. Who's pregnant? We found out at the end of the last episode that it is Haley. It wasn't Brooke. So in this episode, the beginning of the episode, we start with Haley revealing to Nathan that she is pregnant. But this is right after he finds out that he just got accepted to Duke. Now, obviously, the Nathan character, we know is going to do the right thing. We know Haley is obviously more important than any college, as well as their kid. But the thing is, Nathan's been working for this his whole life. And it was a poor choice for Haley to wait until the moment he tells her he gets into his dream college for her to tell him that she's pregnant. She knew about it for several weeks. She should have told him sometime before now, not wait to this moment to let him know. But she does, and obviously Nathan's world is turned upside down, It's not that he's disappointed in the news, but he is scared of it. And how's that going to affect his future, which he just a few seconds ago thought that he was getting everything he wanted, and now it's just all in question. And he doesn't want to know what Haley wants because, she wants to go to Stanford. And we have this really good scene, too, in the episode with Haley and Dan, where Dan talks to Haley. It's a really sweet moment, and it just builds on the changing character that Dan is in this season. But they kind of ruin that in the next scene where Dan goes to congratulate Nathan on the pregnancy, but also Duke, and persuading Nathan to go to Duke at all costs, whether that means Haley going off to California and going to her own college or whatever. It means Nathan goes to Duke and follows his dream that he's had set, which I'm not saying that's not Dan's character, because it is something that I find probably is his character, but it's just something I dislike. However, you would think that Dan would have learned from his mistakes as his character is doing, and looking back in the past and starting in this season, moving forward, the choices he made, where he would say things a little bit differently to Nathan in this scene, where he's like, I think you should go to Duke. I think you should both go to Duke. I think you should persuade her to go to Duke. And I'm not saying like that would be the right thing to do or whatever, but I'm just saying I think he would approach it differently. If I was writing this episode, I would have wrote it a little bit differently and not made the Dan decision so harsh in this episode when he's changing a little bit. But we have that, and obviously Dan's disappointed at the end of the episode when Nathan, because him and Haley kind of argue in the episode, and Haley goes and stays with Karen while Nathan goes to the press conference. Finally, also, we end this stupid storyline with Nathan and Rachel and him trying to get answers. And finally, when he tells Rachel that Haley's pregnant, she's like, I didn't see Keith. I've just been bullshitting you this whole time. And we finally get rid of that stupid storyline, and Rachel's on to other pointless storylines in this season. So Nathan ends up going to the press conference and saying that he plans to go to Duke, but he isn't pretty much he isn't sure at the moment where he's going to go, that it's going to be up to the decision that him and Haley make together and what's best in the interest of his family, which is a great thing for him to do. And Whitey's proud of him. Dan's upset, thinks he made a childish decision. Like I said, I feel like this is an earlier season Dan move. I feel like Dan would have been disappointed. I do feel like that. But I feel like I would have wrote it a little bit differently, where he wasn't as such of an ass in this episode, personally. But yeah, we have that stuff going on. Also, Lucas then goes at the press conference to the police station because they brought Derek in. Finds out this isn't Derek. The real Derek's in the police station, her real brother. Don't know who this other guy is, the psycho guy. So then we lead to the end of the episode where Psycho Derek attacks Peyton in the house, and Lucas shows up. He gets tased almost to death before Peyton knocks Psycho Derek over the head with the lamp. And then the real Derek comes in too, fights him, gets thrown down, and then Psycho Derek goes after Peyton again. But then Lucas and the real Derek can get up and throw him out the window. Now, I'm not really sure how I feel about this Psycho Derek storyline. As I rewatch it, they set it up in season 2, so I'm glad they brought it back in terms of, not just leaving that out there and us wondering what that Watch Me, Watch You thing was. I know a lot of people probably forgot all about it. I didn't. But I don't know. I think I might would have done it a little bit differently than they did. I personally probably would have had this episode be the end of it, and I would have had him probably just get killed or something in this. I don't really know. I'd have to really think about it in terms of what I would do with this character, this storyline, but I don't feel like I would have stretched it out the whole season. Now, one thing, and I like that they do this in this episode because she's caught off guard and everything, and Lucas and this new guy and going ahead and trusting, protectiveness over Peyton. Lucas and her real brother save her from Derek in this episode, but obviously he gets away. I'm glad when they do bring him back later down the line, and we'll talk about that when we get there, that she, along with Brooke too, but it's her that defeats Derek next time. Now, I have a big issue with them bringing Derek back again after that and trying to give us this backstory of him and make him a little bit sympathetic to his situation. That's all bullshit. This dude's a rapist, a psychopath. There should be no sympathy for him. And I think definitely in the point when we get to those episodes in the future, they should have had Peyton and Brooke literally kill him, and he should have been done. Now, I understand you might not want to do that because it's like the fact that this character would have killed this person and how that affects somebody, especially with the storyline you got going on with Dan and the possible Dante stuff we're going to get to. But that's what I would have done, personally, if it was me. So we have all that in this episode. You also have the garbage Brooke storyline. Like I've said, I hate her storylines this season. They seem like they didn't know at all what they wanted to do with her character. And somebody spit out some stupid ideas and they went with it. So they introduced this storyline with Nick, who turns out to be her teacher, and they do that for a few episodes. It's disgusting. One of the worst storylines in the show, honestly. I can't believe they did it. And not only was it just disgusting and terrible, and you feel like Brooke's character has grown past this. You know, if this is something I feel like she would have done in like season 1, not in season 4. And it's not even original. Like Rachel literally did the same thing with Cooper, but he just wasn't a teacher, and that was like last season. So you're just doing the same thing again. And they do that a little bit later in the show too. With I feel like they don't know what to do, so they kind of take older storylines and just repurpose them, and I don't like that. So yeah, and then the final thing I want to talk about in this episode is Dan walks in. You know, he's having a lot of stuff going on in his head. He's seen a lot of stuff, blood in the sink, little brothers, they're dead, all this different stuff. He walks into his office and there's writing on the wall. Genesis, I think 4:15 or there's Genesis something, a number from the Bible. And he walks in, he sees it on the wall. He thinks it's in his head, so he just tries to ignore it and continue working in his office. And Whitey comes up to have a conversation with him and then points it out. Like, I didn't know you were a religious person. Now, obviously, this is a bit weird because you think Whitey would make a bigger deal about it, because especially the way it's written on his wall, like obviously someone vandalized it, like Dan didn't put this on his wall. So then Dan looks in the Bible and read what it is, and it's something about your brother, and like, so obviously whoever wrote murder on his wall is continuing to send him messages, continuing to bother him. There literally is someone out there that knows the truth, which is a big part of the season, and we're going to continue getting pieces of that and building up to the end of the season where we have the big reveal and everything, which we'll get to. The next episode I'm going to talk about here is 406. Where Did You Sleep Last Night? This episode aired November 8th, 2006, and was directed by Paul Johansson. Like I said, one of the best directors on the show, as well as the actor who plays Dan. Like I mentioned at the end of season 3 when he directed 318, I sort of feel like they give him episodes sometimes that he deserves more. Not saying it's a completely bad episode, but he could have done a lot better. Like, you need to be giving this guy like big episodes. Like, honestly, like the mid-season finales and stuff, Paul Johansson should be directing, because they're just, sorry guys, they're just like really good episodes that he directs. Like, he has an eye for television, for cinema, but you keep giving him these episodes that doesn't really do anything. The episode was written by William H. Brown. This is the first of 9 episodes that he does through season 8. Also, I want to point out that Dan finally gets a haircut in this episode. He's been growing his hair out since sometime in season 3, and the last episode was pretty long. Not how I like Dan's hair to look, definitely. So they cut his hair in this one, goes back to the normal Dan haircut, but kind of shorter. And also, I want to point out that Junk still has a shaved head. Not sure what's going on there. Once again, the Nick storyline is disgusting. They continued this in the episode. Beyond tired at this point still of Rachel and Brooke's friendship. Never was a fan of that on the show, especially at this point in the show. In the season, Rick Fox is brought in, famous basketball player, as Dante Jones, the bookie, and villain for a lot of from this point to the mid-season of season 4, and ultimately causes a lot of problems for Nathan, Haley, Dan. Honestly, this is a game changer too, and I wonder whose decision and why it was that decision to do that. Because I mean, ultimately, if you've rewatched it, you know what's going to happen, and this is a situation where he has to shave points. There's the accident in the mid-season, and this ultimately causes him to lose his scholarship to Duke. And he doesn't end up going to Duke. And I wonder what the purpose was. Was it just like something where they're like, yeah, we can do this, and it could just happen? Who does he really need to go to Duke? Like, we could do something else. Or like, if there was like a particular reason they didn't want his character to go to Duke, if they couldn't get if Duke wouldn't allow them to say that in the show, or I don't really know what the purpose behind it was. If they wanted him to really go to a fictional college, which he ends up doing with Lucas and Haley and Whitey. So, but anyways, that whole thing with Dante starts in this episode, and it builds on the basketball stuff. They have a lot of basketball games in this episode, but they do it through a montage, which I think is really great, and built on the passage of time in the episode, but also showed us bits and pieces of the game. And Lucas rejoining the team, which he does in this episode, and he actually, he gave his jersey number to Skills, so he has a new jersey number in this episode, and it's one that Whitey gives him, and it's Keith's old jersey number, which I thought was really sweet, and I liked it. I don't know, If I personally would have done that, I think I would have just kept Lucas having the same number 3 because that was his number. I don't know if I ever would have switched it to Skills, but I do like that he keeps the old number, given that he already gave that number to Skills, number 3. Um, I feel like I mentioned, they can't really decide how they want to write Dan in this season. They keep wanting to write him like they would have written him in season 1 through 3, but he's changing, and I think like there's definitely points where I'm like, I don't think this version of Dan at this point would act like this. Like in this episode, Nathan's in over his head, and this is right before the power goes. They cut the power off at the apartment and everything, and he's having really bad money problems, and he goes to Dan and asks for help, and Dan says no, and I don't think that Dan would have said no. I don't know if he would have straight up gave him the money. I think there might have been some sort of backhand thing, like, I'll give you the money if you come to your senses and say that you're going to Duke. Now, this could have still ended up with Nathan not taking the money because of him not making the decision, but they do, and I believe this episode or the next episode, I can't remember because I've watched them all back to back, that Haley agrees to go to Duke with Nathan. I think it's this episode. So I don't know if that would have really worked, but I feel like that's something Dan would have done to Nathan, not just say no as far as not giving him the money. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if they really knew how to write Dan at this point. They were all like kind of wishy-washy on that. Also, I want to point out something that Karen mentions about her family and doing stuff along in this episode. We never know at all like what's going on with Karen's family. I think it's mentioned something like they kind of disown her when she gets pregnant with Lucas and raises him on her own. But it's weird. Like, I'm assuming that she's only an only child, doesn't have a sibling. But both her parents just like straight up disregarded her. And are they even from Tree Hill? Like, I mean, obviously they are because she grew up there. So are they still living Tree Hill, or did they move? These big questions that bother me throughout the show, just like the fact that Dan and Keith's parents didn't come back to the funeral. What? And they're never really mentioned in the future either. Like, that's big things that bother me. Is like, I think they should have came back to the funeral, and I think we should have gotten some sort of reaction at the end of season 4, even in the season 5, maybe with them meeting Jamie or something, and like getting the reaction of the fact that Dan's a murderer. Like, those are big things that I feel like I would have liked to have seen as a fan, versus definitely some of this other garbage that they end up writing into the show, like whatever Rachel's storyline was this season. You also have the real Derek in this episode, introducing him, giving some backstory on him and his relationship to Peyton, going in on that, and I like the fight scene between him and Peyton in the ring, and her having flashbacks to everything that's hurt her in the past. I thought that was really good, and I like the relationship overall that they build over the next 3 episodes. And they also start the Mouth and Gigi thing in this episode, which doesn't last long at all, but they do start it in this season, and it brings it back in season 6, if you remember. But they started in this episode, and I thought their relationship was cute. I liked it. But then we get to episode 407, which is All the Things I've Done. And this episode aired November 15th, 2006, and was directed by David Jackson and written by Adele Lim. Now, this is the first of her 2 episodes, and she also co-wrote Crazy Rich Asians, so I thought that was really cool. But yeah, so this episode is their final game before the state championships. They're playing against Verona. I'm not really sure where they filmed this episode. I'm very curious. I think they filmed this at Hanover High School, because I was trying to get like that's the feel I got from it, like looking at it, but I'm not positive. It looked like a college basketball gym, but it definitely wasn't, because it wasn't UNCW, because it wasn't their colors. This is like orange, but. So they play against Verona. Obviously, the big thing in this episode is that Nathan has to shave those points. And so he does it until the end, and it's out of his hands. And pretty much they're going to win the game. Which they are going to win the game. They do win the game in the episode, but they're going to win it by more than 10 points, which is what they can't do. But Lucas, after having a conversation with Nathan and figuring out the truth, doing one for his brother, he shaves the points. And they win by less than 10. Nathan's in the clear, he thinks, because he did what Dante wanted. But obviously, in the next episode, we find out that Dante is going to go further on his deal. But that's the big thing about this episode, is the shaving the points. We also have a finality to the Nick Brooks stuff. Finally, oh god, it's just awful. But they go into that in this episode, and she realizes that he's a bad guy. Obviously, he is. He's a fucking student or fucking teacher, hitting on a student, sleeping with a student. It's disgusting. And Rachel finally does some good stuff. You kind of like her in this episode, that she does stand up for Brooke and tells Brooke the truth, and about Nick. But who cares, really, in the overall things. I'm not a big fan of the character. And then you also have the stuff with Mouth in the episode, making a decision whether he wants to actually go on his date with Gigi or hook up with this model, which he makes the decision to go on his date with Gigi, which was great. Didn't really mind that storyline with everything Mouth's going through. I feel like that storyline kind of worked for him. Haley also, in this episode, babysits some kids, so that's kind of just like little fun thing added in, and her getting experience, I guess, as a mom. And Deb gets arrested in this episode for stealing a prescription and trying to get it, made. And it's a lot of different painkillers. So she ends up getting arrested, and Dan makes a deal with her, like he'll get her out of prison if she gives Trick back to Karen. Ultimately, Deb does, and Dan gives it back to Karen at the end of this episode, which is great. I really like that. Dan does make a comment in this episode that he doesn't care if Deb ODs, as long as that she gives Trick back to Karen. And this is interesting because I watched it. We obviously know that Dan does care more than he lets on, because he says that, and it's really mean in that episode. But when she actually does OD in a later episode, episode 12 of season 4, Dan's the one that comes and, calls the police and everything. And so he really does care, despite the things that he says. And then leads us into the final episode I'm going to talk about here, and that is, final episode I'm going to talk about here, 408, Nothing Left to Say But Goodbye, which originally aired November 22nd, 2006, was directed by Janice Cook and written by John A. Norris. And this episode is the night before the state championship, and it's a dinner party, essentially for the team and people involved with the team. And Whitey's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, and Nathan's getting an MVP award. Now, Lucas is asked to present the MVP award to Nathan. He sort of has a problem with it because of what's going on. And he also finds out, well, no, he doesn't find that out. Nathan finds out in the episode that Dante wants him to lose the championship. He's not going to do it. Dante ends up threatening him, threatening Haley, all of this. So eventually Nathan goes to Dan. And I'll get to that in a second. But going back, Dan actually goes to this dinner with Karen. He asks her to go, and she's kind of iffy on it. But then after conversation, because then Brooke asked Lucas to go with him in this, or her with this episode. He agrees to it, which upsets Peyton. But anyways, they go together, and after conversation with Lucas and Karen, Karen decides to ask, or to go with Dan. So Dan and Karen go, and I love it. I love the stuff with Dan and Karen in this season up until the end, obviously, but it's really nice seeing a what-if sort of relationship with them two, and what could have been if he had chose her, and what their life would have been like, and what kind of couple they would have been, which is really nice. And then obviously the Brooke and Lucas stuff is just stale in this episode, which is supposed to be, the relationship's over, but they're just kind of like going and seeing what happens. And Lucas realizes it in this episode that he doesn't want to be with Brooke anymore. And she really just asked him out of spite, it feels like, because she wants to make Peyton upset, who wants to tell Lucas the truth. She asked Lucas to go with her, but then Brooks already asked her, so Peyton ends up going with her real brother Derek, and this is his last episode in season 4, and he won't return until season 6, which I'm really glad they bring him back. I wish they would have made a bigger storyline with him in the show, but unfortunately they didn't. But it's a really nice moment with her and him in this episode as they go on a date. She goes, or he goes as her date to the team dinner. So all that's happened. They do bring Tim's stepmom Sherry back in this episode in a funny scene and kind of like let you know where Tim's at because he disappeared after 308 of last season, and that's a nice little scene. Really eye-watering stuff with Whitey delivering his speech about his first love. All that's really great. And then the biggest thing here is then Nathan goes to Dan and tells him what's up. And I love the scenes with Paul Johansson and James Lafferty always, but in this season because it's really that father-son relationship, and you see the father that Dan is, and that he'll do anything for Nathan ultimately. And that's how I like Dan written, and that's how we see him moving forward. But he ends up going to Dante in the episode in the strip club. And it's a painful scene to watch because I love Dan so much, and I love how he's so powerful. But he's there, and he's pretty much threatens Dante that you're going to leave Nathan alone, whether I fucking pay you or not. But then Dante's like, threatens him back about all the people in his life that he can go after, and then people start crowding around Dan, bodyguards and stuff, and Dan knows, I can't get out of this. I need to back up because this situation is over my head. Which ultimately ends in the episode with Nathan going to talk to Dan, and Dan saying, you're going to have to lose the state championship. I don't really know what other way we can get out of this. Which is a very depressing episode, depressing moment in the episode, both for Nathan and for Dan. You know, obviously for Nathan, but Dan, he is not used to not having control like that. And he's got Nathan to this point. This is like everything he's dreamed of too, and now he's having to tell his son that he's going to have to lose the state championship because he failed, for Nathan. He failed taking care of the situation. He failed giving him the money, and now, on top of everything else that Dan's done and doesn't regret and regrets, like, if you can imagine the weight that he feels at this moment, as well as Nathan, who's trying to keep that hasn't told anyone else really other than Dan and Lucas doesn't, his opinion of it's different and doesn't really understand what Nathan's going through. So that happens in the last little bit of this episode. The other big cliffhanger is that Peyton finally tells Lucas her true feelings, and it's left open what was going to happen. We just moved out of the window, out of Peyton's house, and it's left a cliffhanger. How is Lucas going to respond to her true feelings? All right, guys, that's our episode today. We'll be back with the next episode where we'll be talking about 409 of 410, which is the end of the first half of season 4, and my personal favorite episode, I think, of season 4, unless that changes during this rewatch. But 409 is an incredible episode, and we'll talk about that on the next episode. Thanks, guys.